You know, have you ever opened a chemistry textbook and just your eyes glaze over? You
Absolutely.
see a page full of these different K values, KWK, KA, KSP, KPC, and you just think, okay, this is it. This is where the math finally kills the chemistry for me.
I get that. I really do. But the thing is, this chapter isn't about random math. It's actually a toolkit. It's about control.
Control.
Yes. We're taking that equilibrium idea you already know and just specializing it. Ka lets you control acidity. KSP controls precipitation. KPC even lets you control separation. Our whole mission today is to break down every single one of these definitions and calculations.
Right. So our goal for you is pretty simple. Total fluency.
Mm-hmm.
By the time we're done, you'll be able to calculate pH for any solution, you'll understand how buffers work their magic, and you'll master the math behind all these different equilibrium types.
Let's jump in.
So let's start with the basics, right? The foundation for all of this has to be the Brønsted-Lowry theory. Acids donate protons, bases accept them.
Exactly, and that immediately gets you thinking about the other side of the equation. What are the products doing? And that leads us straight to this idea of a conjugate pair.
Okay.
I like to think of it as a chemical tag team. You link a reactant and a product just by moving a single proton. So take ammonia and water. NH3 plus H2O is in equilibrium with NH4 plus and OH.
So water is the acid. It donates a proton.
Right. Which means when the reaction goes in reverse, that NH4 plus ion, the ammonium ion, has to be able to donate that proton back.
Ah, so it becomes the conjugate acid.
Precisely. NH4 plus is the conjugate acid of the base NH3. And the rule is simple. The acid in the pair always has one more proton than its base. It's always about that one proton.
And that brings us to water itself, which is, well, it's special, isn't it? It can play both roles.
It's amphoteric, exactly. It can donate or accept a proton, which means it even reacts with itself a tiny, tiny bit.
The auto-ionization of water.
Yep. H2O is in equilibrium with H plus and OH. And because the concentration of pure water is pretty much constant, we can simplify the equilibrium expression to get the ionic product of water, Kw.
And the mathematical definition here is crucial.
It is. Kw equals the concentration of H plus times the concentration of OH. And this is a value you really need to just commit to memory. At 298 Kelvin, it's 1.00 times 10 to the minus 14.
That number is so important.
It's profound. It manages the entire balance between H plus and OH. And since they're produced in equal amounts in pure water, it proves that the concentration of both is exactly 10 to the minus 7. You can never have zero H plus ions, ever.
And dealing with numbers like 10 to the minus 7 is just, it's not practical, is it?
Not at all.
Which is exactly why we have the pH scale.
Yeah.
Sørensen needed a way to make these huge ranges of numbers manageable.
He really did. And the definition is pH equals minus log to the base 10 of the hydrogen ion concentration. The negative sign is just there to turn these small negative powers into nice positive numbers we can actually work with.
And to go backwards to get concentration from pH.
You just use the inverse function. The concentration of H plus is 10 to the power of minus pH. Simple as that.
So let's apply it to the easy case first. Strong monobasic acids, like HCl, they ionize completely.
Right. So the key rule is that the hydrogen ion concentration is, for all intents and purposes, the same as the starting acid concentration.
So a 0.1 molar HCl solution
has a pH of 1. And because it's a logarithmic scale, if you dilute that by a factor of 10, the pH goes up by 1 unit, from 1 to 2.
Now, strong bases like sodium hydroxide are where Kw really shows its value. Because you start with hydroxide concentration, but you need pH.
That's the challenge. The base ionizes completely, so you know your OH concentration immediately. But to get pH, you have to find the H plus concentration first. There's no way around it.
So you have to make a detour through Kw.
A mandatory detour. You find the H plus concentration by taking Kw and dividing it by your known OH concentration. Once you have that H plus FUT, then you just take the negative log to find the pH.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's move to the systems that are actually in equilibrium. The weak acids.
Like ethanoic acid, yeah. They only partially ionize. So you have your HA molecule in equilibrium with H plus and A ions.
And this gives us another constant, Ka, the acid dissociation constant.
Right. And you can think of Ka as the acids. It's reluctance factor. The expression is Ka equals H plus times A all divided by HA. A really big Ka means it has zero reluctance. It just splits apart.
Like nitric acid.
Exactly. But a tiny Ka means high reluctance. The equilibrium would much rather stay as the undissociated molecule.
And to make comparing these tiny Ka numbers easier, we use pK.
Yep. pK is just the negative log of Ka. And the key thing to remember is that the relationship is inverse. The less positive the pKa, the stronger the acid.
So a very low pKa means a very strong acid.
A very strong acid. Nitric acid is around minus 1.4. Water's is 14. Big difference.
For the calculations with weak acids, we have to make two pretty big assumptions to make the math work.
We do, and they're okay to make because the ionization is so small. First, we assume all the H plus comes from the acid, not the water.
Which is fair, since the acid contributes so much more.
And second, we assume that the equilibrium concentration of the undissociated acid, HA, is basically the same as what you started with, because so little of it actually breaks apart.
Okay, so with those assumptions, how do we do the two main calculation types? First, finding Ka from a known pH.
Well, because the acid is the main source of the ions, we can say that the concentration of H plus is equal to the concentration of A.
So the chi expression simplifies.
It simplifies to chi equals H plus squared divided by HA. So you just convert your pH to an H plus concentration, square it, and divide by the initial acid concentration.
And the other way around, finding pH from a known Ka.
You just rearrange that same simplified formula. The H plus concentration will be the square root of Ka times the HA concentration. Then you take the negative log of that answer to get your pH.
This all leads directly to one of the most practical applications in chemistry, doesn't it? Buffer solutions.
Absolutely they are. They're like a chemical safety net. They're solutions that resist any significant change in pH when you add a little bit of acid or a little bit of base.
And they work by having a big reserve of both the weak acid and its conjugate base.
A huge reserve. Take the classic ethanoic acid and sodium ethanoate buffer. You have tons of CH3COOH molecules and tons of CH3COO ions ready to go.
Okay, so let's say I add some acid, some H plus ions to that buffer. What happens?
The big reserve of the conjugate base, the ethanoate ions, immediately reacts with that added H plus bucket, mops them up to form more of the undissociated acid. The equilibrium shifts left, and the pH barely moves.
And if I add a base like OH,
the added OH reacts with the small amount of H plus that's already there, making water. But then to replace that H plus that was just used up, the huge reserve of the weak acid ionizes. The equilibrium shifts right, and again, the pH stays stable.
Man, this is not just a lad curiosity. This is how life works.
It's absolutely vital. The carbon dioxide and hydrogen carbonate system in our blood is a buffer. It keeps our blood pH in this incredibly narrow window between 7.35 and 7.45. If it drops below that, you get acidosis. It's a life or death mechanism.
So for the calculations, since the reserves are so large, we don't need this squared term anymore.
Exactly. We use the full chi expression, but we just plug in the known starting concentrations of the acid and its salt. You rearrange it to find the H plus concentration, which is just chi times the ratio of the acid concentration to the salt concentration.
And that ratio is everything.
The pH of the buffer depends almost entirely on that ratio.
All right, let's switch gears a bit. We've been talking about things that dissolve. What about the stuff that, well, that doesn't, or at least barely does?
The sparingly soluble salts. And that brings us to the solubility product, KSP.
So even something we label insoluble, like silver chloride, dissolves a tiny bit.
It does. And when the solution is saturated, you get an equilibrium between the solid salt and its dissolved ions. For AgCl, that's solid AgCl in equilibrium with aqueous Ag plus and Cl ions.
And because the solid's concentration is constant,
we leave it out of the expression. So KSP is just the concentration of Ag plus times the concentration of Cl.
You have to watch the stoichiometry here. That's the common trap.
The most common trap. If you have something like iron 3 sulfide, F2S3, it produces 2 iron ions and 3 sulfide ions. So the KSP expression is the concentration of F3 plus squared times the concentration of S2 cubed.
And a smaller KSP value means
lower solubility. Much lower.
Okay, so let's walk through a calculation. Say we know the solubility of a salt, like magnesium fluoride MgF2, is X.
Yeah.
How do we find KSP?
Right, so if the solubility is X, then the concentration of Mg2 plus ions is also X. But because you get 2 fluoride ions for every 1 unit that dissolves, the concentration of F is 2X.
And you have to plug that into the expression.
You have to. So KSP would be X times 2X squared, which works out to 4X cubed.
And the most useful application is probably predicting if a precipitate will form.
For sure. What you do is calculate something called the ionic product, which is just the product of the actual ion concentrations in your solution at that moment. If that calculated value is greater than the known KSP, then precipitation has to occur.
And that leads us to the common ion effect.
Which is a really neat application of Le Chatelier's principle. It's just the idea that a salt becomes even less soluble if you add another compound that shares one of its ions.
So if I have my saturated silver chloride solution and I add some sodium chloride.
You're flowing the system with extra chloride ions. The equilibrium sees that and says, whoa, too much product, and it shifts to the left, back towards the solid.
Forcing more silver chloride to precipitate out.
Exactly. The common ion drastically reduces the solubility of the sparingly soluble salt.
Okay, our final equilibrium constant. This one's a little different. It's not just about what's in one solution, but what happens between two.
Two immiscible solutions, yeah. The ones that don't mix, like oil and water. This is the partition coefficient, KPC.
So it describes how a solute decides to, well, partition itself between the two layers.
It's an equilibrium constant for that distribution. It's simply the ratio of the solute's concentration in the organic solvent divided by its concentration in the aqueous solvent.
And what determines where it wants to go.
It all comes down to polarity and intermolecular forces, like dissolves, like...
So something polar, like ammonia with its hydrogen bonding.
It's going to be much happier in the water layer than in a non-polar organic solvent. So its KPC, organic over aqueous, will be less than 1.
But non-polar molecule, like iodine.
We'll prefer the non-polar organic solvent, so its KPC will be greater than 1.
And this is the fundamental principle behind chromatography.
It is. Separation science. Different components in a mixture will have different KPC values between the mobile phase and the stationary phase, so they travel at different speeds and separate out.
So, to recap, we've really covered the full landscape of advanced equilibria. We started with the foundation, conjugate pairs in Kw, then we moved through all the pH calculations for strong and weak systems, using K as that measure of an acid's reluctance.
Right, and we saw how buffers use those principles to maintain stability.
And finally, we tackled the constants for phase changes, KSP for solubility, and KPC for partitioning between two liquids.
And what's so clear is how these constants are just tools for precise chemical control, whether it's in a beaker or in our own bloodstream. You know, we talked about how KSP only applies to salts that are barely soluble, but think about this for a second.
Okay.
If you could live in a world where table salt, NaCl, suddenly had a tiny measurable KSP, what would that do to the chemistry of our oceans? How would that single change completely redefine water's role as the universal solvent?
That's a powerful thought, a completely different world. Well, now you have the conceptual framework and the mathematical tools to understanding exactly why these constants define and control so much of the world around us. Go forth and put this fluency to work.